we'll just quickly touch on the Amazon here. So improving the melee skills, that's going to be pretty cool. The fend changes is what I think I'm most interested in. Not being locked out by the evade skills. That'll be interesting. Do you think that it has the potential to compete with a Zealer though? I'm picturing bot D spears on. What I'm picturing is I want to say like a Fury Druid-ish. Good damage, but I don't know how good the survivability is going to be. Again, I'll have to test this all in the PTR, but in its current form, I think even if you don't put any points into dodge, evade, and avoid, and you don't get that lockout bug, I still don't think... I mean, I've never made Breath of the Dying in an Amazon Spear, but it would be interesting to try it on like a triple shaled Ethone Sedan or something like that. So I think that's really cool. The passive and magic skills, what they touched on, and again, they're not covering everything. It's just like a brief overview, right? The changes to the radius of inner sight, slow down missiles, stuff like that. It's cool. Is it going to be that useful? I'm assuming that a buff to radius is really only going to impact like playthroughs on the characters, because I just can't see myself ever using slow missile in like a Chaos Sanctuary run. But that's cool though. It was interesting talking about removing the different cooldown on different skills and whatnot, and he mentioned like removing the cooldown on Valkyrie. I just don't see how like that's gonna change anything. Like other characters like the Druid, absolutely. Shifting some of those cooldown times, like not having to cast Armageddon in a 7-second cooldown before you can cast Fissure. That's horrible. But for Valkyrie, I don't know. When they talk about supporting underperforming bow and crossbow skills, I'm really hoping that they please remove the cooldown time on Immolation Arrow. I'll get to the shoutouts, guys, in a second. Please remove the cooldown on Immolation Arrow. I've messed around with that build before with a Hand of Justice bow and also
Valkyrie spam for the win.
Phoenix Runeword. And it actually was not too bad in areas that there wasn't fire immune. It's just the cooldown destroys that build. Because when you fully synergize Immolation Arrow, you still have extra points that you could put into like Freezing Arrow. So you could run a dual spec shifted more towards fire than cold. So that would be really cool if they remove the cooldown on that. Damage, like a little bit of damage buff would be cool. And the final thing, talking about the mana cost for cold skills, that is an improvement. Definitely is. I'm just thinking though, like end game, has anybody not like used Silkweaves and invested some extra points into mana? I mean, I think that if anything, the Javazon was worse for mana recovery than the endgame Frost Maiden that I built, but because if you invest enough mana to get like 1,000 plus mana and then Silkweaves, it's really not that bad. But anyways, that's all good stuff. They didn't touch anything on maybe like a buff to multi-shot or strafe. I think if you just made multi-shot so that instead of doing 3/4 damage, just make it do full damage. Multi-shot gets full damage. I mean, strafe would be cool to get a little bit of a buff. Maybe Magic Arrow gets more % magic damage. I don't know, Guided Arrow. Guided Arrow is already really good, but in general, physical Boazon is pretty bad. Like if you're talking about all of the Boazon skills, really good cold boa is the best. It's the physical and the fire. So that's like what I'm hoping they adjust on those two. Quickly talk about the assassins. So they discussed some cool stuff with the martial arts tree. Now, one of the concerns that I have that was brought up in chat is that even though they are changing the way that you can dump charges, so if you hit up 3 charges for Phoenix Strike and you expend a charge, you're not expending everything. You can expend like scale down, you can expend 2 charges, build them up again. That's an interesting take. We've seen that in Project Diablo 2. Now, I'm going to be honest, I haven't really played this build extensively or really at all, other than using like Dragon Talon with the kicks in for Ubers. I'm just curious. I don't think I recall them saying anything about a significant damage buff, because I have watched one video where somebody had 2 crazy dual claws, chains of honors, all of the best plus skills, martial arts skillers, torch and Annie, and I remember the build only being like a blood moor farmer, or like a player's 1 farmer. So the ability to build up those charges and expend 3 will up your damage, but I'm hoping that across the board, like Phoenix Strike receives some significant damage. The stuff that they mentioned around the Shadow Splints, just changing some of the tooltips for like quality of life stuff, that's cool. I don't think there's really a lot that I would change on that tree. Like Cloak of Shadows, Burst of Speed, Shadow Warrior, Shadow Master, Venom. It's already like a really good skill tree, so I don't think a lot needs to be changed there. And then when they talk about improving underused trap skills, it was interesting that Rob Gallerini said that they wanted to shift away from Death Sentry, remove some of the synergies, and make some of the other lesser used traps like lightning and the fire traps more used. Now, I think everybody uses the lightning sentry a lot, but when he talks about buffing the fire tree and the fire traps, I'm hoping he's going to significantly buff Wake of Fire. And the only reason that is because even though it's a level 12 skill, Wake of Fire, if you wanted to make a fire trap sin, it's the only real viable skill. I don't know if you guys have messed around with the full fire traps before. Wake of Inferno is like nothing other than like a boss killer at best. If you can drop 5 of them around a boss like Diablo before he spawns, it can do decent damage. Like I think you can get like 5 or 6k per second. So when you have 5 of them together, all focusing on a single target, it works okay. But general, like if you were trying to use Wake of Inferno for like Ancient Tunnels, it's horrible. It's clunky. So they didn't mention anything about changing the way that it operates. So I'm just hoping that Wake of Fire receives a pretty significant damage buff, because I have played around with that character in Project Diablo 2, a pure Wake of Fire traps in. It is a fun build to play. Just throwing traps everywhere, and they're just... I mean, it's really good at normal, so you can just imagine what it's like in hell difficulty if it had good scaling damage, like enough to clear... Like, if you could comfortably clear the Ancient Tunnels with Wake of Fire, just tossing like 4 Wake of Fires and like a Death Sentry after it, that would be a really cool build, and I think I would play it a lot, because you could spam your Wake of Fire, Death Sentry, and then Fire Blast. And if they buffed up the damage, a combination of those skills, eventually down the road, making like an Infinity Mercenary, it would be a cool build, but the only... It's called Ring of Fire. The only thing that I'm also concerned about is the limited and restricted areas that are viable for a Fire Sorceress. Or sorry, for a Fire character. Because I played as a Fire Sorceress on ladder. I had a full towels, triple Fire facets. So I had negative 30 Fire res with the full towel set, plus 15 damage, all Fire skillers, Torch and Annie. And it's cool that one-shots Mephisto, one-shots Pindle, but you can't really do anything besides Indariel, Pindle, Mephisto, and Ancient Tunnels. So they talked about changing the synergies, but I don't really see myself running a Fire Traps in unless they like open up some like better areas. Like I don't think it'll function really good in like Chaos Sanctuary, if you kind of know what I mean. Covering the Barbarian proposed changes, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff. First thing I'll talk about is the changes to some of the synergies or the combat skills. So they did mention switching out, for example, the Shout synergy for battle orders for Berserk. I think that's really cool. He did mention adding an additional synergy to Frenzy. That's the wording that he used. I'm not sure if he meant he maybe like replaced a synergy, but he talked about having increased stamina provide a damage synergy to Frenzy. So I just talked about this or explained this, that Frenzy is already a very heavy skill point investment build compared to something like Whirlwind, right? So Whirlwind is 20 points into the class-specific weapon that you're using, your War Cries, and then 20 points. I think I said 20 points of the weapon class you're using, right? And then 20 points of the whirlwind. That's it, right? Your other 1-point wonders, you max battle orders, then you have a lot of other freedom with your different skills. Frenzy is 20 points into Frenzy, 20 points into Double Swing, 20 points into Taunt, and then 20 points into the class-specific weapon that you're using. So that's already 80 points. And then if you throw on another Synergy increased stamina on top of that, it gets to the point where there's too many synergies to try and max out the damage, because you still want to put some points into Warcry. You probably want to have 1 point into Berserk. You can ignore Berserk and go with the Reaper's Toll Mercenary to handle most physical immune monsters that way, But by the time you invest like Natural Resist, Iron Skin, Shout, Battle Orders, Battle Command, like the other prerequisites to get to Berserk, Frenzy, and then you start maxing out synergies, I'm not sure if adding an additional 20 points from increased stamina is really going to be that beneficial. In terms of the enhanced throwing skills, the Pierce and upped damage is really cool. I have not played around with this build a ton, other than the fact that I know with the right ethereal weapons, like I think there's the axe that procs amp damage. I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head. There's the daggers that replenish their quantity. That's War Strike, right? And I forget what the axe is. Anyways, they run out of quantity. Lacerator. There we go. Thank you, Mando. They run out of quantity a lot. So the extra pierce and damage is cool. The build definitely needs that. I still think it'll kind of be like a little bit of an annoying build in general. That's just the way it is. I don't think they're going to improve the quantity of the weapons. The changes to Leap, speeding up its skills. And they did mention, I think, a damage increase and speeding up Leap attack. That's cool. And you guys mentioned Whirlwind. They asked about it here, and they didn't really plan on changing too much because I guess it would change the fundamental mechanics of the skill. I think an easy adjustment to Whirlwind is just make it start out at 0 damage and then scale up from there. I believe the starting damage of Whirlwind, just let me check. I believe it's negative 54. Combat skills, Whirlwind. Okay, it starts out at negative 50. So you need to have 8 points into Whirlwind to get it to plus 6 damage. So why not have it start at 0? Scale the exact same way, scale at plus 8 damage per level of investment. Maybe up the attack rating bit, because we did mention like melee in general struggles from attack rating. But I think that could be a simple way to adjust it. So at level 20, you'd have plus 152% damage instead of plus 102. The other thing is trying to deal with the issue of mana burn. That's kind of a whole nother deal though. I really hate mana burn. I feel like it makes the already clunky skill even worse to use. When you get hit with mana burn, you can't do anything. But overall, that's kind of what I would adjust there. He did mention something very interesting about Grim Ward reducing, I think he said enemy damage and enemy physical res. I definitely heard physical res. That's cool. We've seen that item or that skill toyed around with in Path of Diablo. I think that's interesting. How much of a minus physical res it's going to add could be pretty big. Like if you have a Reaper's Toll Mercenary proccing Decrep, and if you could get minus 20 to 30 extra negative physical res on top of that minus 50 from Decrep, like that's going to be a huge potential damage increase for a build that I don't want to say it struggles, because of all the melee builds, it probably can do Bale runs the fastest just because of how you can go through Bale waves, but that'll be interesting to see for sure. But overall, I think that's pretty promising. I personally don't like the Barbarian at all, and I don't know how much these changes actually make me want to play the Barb, but I think it's a step in the right direction. But I'm honestly more excited for the Druid, which is next. I really want to spend a lot of time rambling on about the Druid, because this is one of my favorite characters to play. So first, to start off by talking about the fire skills, I think that one of the biggest things they did touch on this is adjusting the cooldowns on some of these skills. I don't know if you guys have actually extensively played a Fire Druid before. There is nothing more aggravating or annoying to play, depending on like, however you want to describe it, of casting Armageddon and then having a 7-second cooldown where you cannot cast Fissure or any other damage dealing. So, no, I think it doesn't affect Firestorm, but you don't really use Firestorm. So that right off the bat needs to be addressed. I would like to see cooldowns almost entirely removed, or at least significantly reduced. So like maybe Fissure has half the cooldown or no cooldown. I would love to see Volcano with no cooldown, because that's actually a skill that's been made viable in other mods, and I love playing as a Volcano Druid. Like, it was one of my favorite builds that I played in Pro Diablo 2. But they need to address that 7-second cooldown, because that is just, when you cast it and you're just running around waiting, like, that needs to be addressed first. The second is the radius and rate at which Armageddon falls. It does need to be addressed, because it is a skill that does a ton of damage. Damage is not an issue. It's the rate at which it actually hits stuff. Like, I would love to actually, like, maybe when I edit this video, I might like sit with the skill actually active and just show you how long it takes to kill stuff. I don't know. We'll see how much time I feel like putting into editing this video. But that would be something I would like to see addressed, is maybe the radius, the rate at which they fall, and the amount that falls, to make it a little bit more of a viable skill. Big Bot, unfortunately, Ravenlore is the go-to helmet. Less clunky Arctic Blast skill, that's kind of cool, I guess. Like, maybe they're aiming that more towards early gameplay, so you're not like forced to play as a Fire Druid early on. So you could just save a respec and maybe work your way. They did talk about adjusting the Wind Druid skill tree, so that might be interesting. Although Fire is so powerful in normal and into Nightmare that I don't think I'll change anything there. They talked about shapeshifting improvements, so buffing attack rating on Fury Druid. That's cool. Fury Druid actually naturally has some pretty decent attack rating because of the points you put into Werewolf and then putting Fury itself, but more attack rating is not a bad thing, because it's something that like melee in general suffers from. They didn't touch on much for the Bear unless I missed it, so I would definitely like to see significant damage improvement on Maul and the Druid itself. It's just the Druid is, the Werebear is a slower Fury Druid. It's a slower, worse Fury Druid. It's just, it's never going to be better. When they talked about removing some of these synergies for Fireclaw, that is an interesting idea. So investing less points, but still getting the same amount of damage. Again, freeing other points to put elsewhere. So you could maybe have like a fully maxed out Fury Druid with a decent Fireclaw. So that, because the main problem with Fireclaw is not the damage, it's running into fire immune monsters. And I'm assuming they're not really going to address like massive fire immune issues. Ever seen AR hit like 25k? I have on a few builds, but it would just be cool to see it have additional physical damage maybe scaled with it. And then another thing I think would be cool too is if you can cast, I think they did mention this, I don't think they specifically alluded to it though, if you could cast Hurricane in Werewolf or Hurricane in Werebear. That's been done in Diablo 2 mods as well. That would be really cool. They talked about making summons more viable. The Vines, they're going to have to do something crazy because the Vines are shit. The extra physical damage reduction to the Spirits, Heart of the Wolverine and Oak Sage, that's cool. Although, like I said, I feel like 8 out of 10 of the deaths are from Elemental. If it takes like a shot from a soul in the World Stone Keep or whatever. I feel like Spirits die more often from Elemental. So I hope that they get extra damage, or excuse me, I hope that they get extra plus life, excuse me, not damage, because yeah, I just feel like Oak Sage and Heart of the Wolverine, they're really good spells, but they just die a lot. I think that the Vines need some massive improvement because they're kind of garbage. And I did mention the idea that I had for Ravens. I think it would be true. Okay, Barbara, I'm going to blame that one on you. I think it would be cool if you summon them and they don't disappear. So they might not do tons of damage, but it'd be cool if they blind monsters, but they always stay with you. Because we talked about with enough plus skills and having like a Ravenlore helmet, you get a significant number of them. And if they just always follow you around, hitting monsters and proccing like the dim vision, blind curse. It's not curse, but animation on their head. You know what I'm talking about. That would make summons in general, I think, a little bit more useful. I don't know what they plan on doing for the Vines, though, because let me just check the actual damage scaling value on the Vines. Just give me 1 second. I'll look this up in the Area Summit. Druid, summoning skills. So Poison Creeper does provide a damage synergy to rabies, but at level 20, it only actually does 84 to 86 damage. So if they're talking about improving the viability of Poison Creeper, I hope they're giving it a significant damage buff, like synergy buff towards rabies, because I think that skill does need some extra damage. Again, I've toyed around with that build fully maxed out. It's not that good. It's okay for cows. That's about it. Carrion Vine. This is how pitiful this skill is. It heals you 10% at level 20. So, like, you're going to get more effective healing from a prayer mercenary than if you give it insight. So you synergize meditation with prayer, you would get way more life recovery than you would. So, I mean, I just can't see myself even wanting to use that skill, even if it had like a 35-40% heal. I don't think I would want to, because it actually has to consume a corpse that you kill before it can heal you. So I don't think I would ever use it. And then Solar Creeper at level 20 gives you 6% mana recovery rate. So again, it's got to consume a corpse to give you that. But why on God's green motherfucking earth would you invest 20 hard points into Solar Creeper when you can just have like a meditation like an insight mercenary? So, I mean, there's always like 1-point wonders with enough skills, but like if you put 1 hard point and you have 10 plus skills or whatever, and I don't know, it better give you at least like 100% mana recovery. If it was something like the scaling percent of mana recovery, like Warmth on a Sorceress, then I think it'd be more useful. But as it currently stands right now, it's bad. It needs a significant increase in mana recovery to actually to consider using it. And also remember, it doesn't actively recover mana. It needs to consume a corpse first. So you need to kill something and you need to wait around for it to consume a corpse before it gives you that extra plus life. So yeah, I don't know. Definitely some massive things need to be changed there. Okay, so for the Necromancer, they're talking about buffing some certain underused summons. Now, they did mention the Skeletal Mages. That's cool. I would love to see a build centered around like spamming low resistance and then having a bunch of summons that do elemental damage. That's really cool. I hope that they do significantly scale the damage of them, because if let me just quickly look up the actual damage value of them. Currently, somewhere in the range of like 300 poison damage, 220 to 224 cold damage, and then 391 to 395 fire damage, lightning damage 59 to 616. So yeah, okay. I mean, if you have a handful of those summons, that's still not significant damage. I do get the concept of if you're having multiples of these summons and you're supporting with the curse, you don't want them to do like insane damage. But if you take, like, if you compare like a lightning sorceress to a trapson, I know this is a horrible comparison, but like if your lightning sentry is only 1 to 10k and your lightning is 1 to 40k, but you can still summon 5 of the lightning sentries, so you somewhat comparable damage. So you don't want to like overshoot that value too much if you have a whole army of them, and then you're boosting them with like a conviction, you know, infinity mercenary and low resistance, boosting their damage. But I definitely think those current numbers, I don't think that stacks up no matter how many you have to do any like significant endgame damage in hell. So hopefully that's buffed up. Now, again, touching back on the... Oh, sorry, they didn't mention anything about... So, Clay Golem, we know is amazing with Decrepify for slowdown. Iron Golem is amazing to cast, or to turn like an Insight rune word into Iron Golem for the Meditation Aura. They didn't mention anything about Blood Golem or Fire Golem. So, I think those need a significant touch-up to even... Zakruda, what's up? To even like remotely consider you using anything other than those two options. I feel like 90% of endgame builds are using Insight Iron Golem, and then for some certain scenarios like Ubers, or if you just want extra crowd control and slowdown, excuse me, Clay Golem and Decrep is really good, but something needs to be done for Blood Golem and Fire Golem to even remotely make me consider using anything other than those two skills. Again, bone skills, I think that the majority of the people play PVM, not PvP PvP. So I totally understand that there's pushback against increasing the damage of already what is probably the best PvP character, or one of the best. But I think that you should weight more of the balance changes around PvM than PvP. Just gonna say it. Sorry if that makes some people hate me. I do think, though, that... Hey, Lucky, thank you for the raid. That you could maybe do a thing where, like, if you hostile somebody, it goes back to LOD damage scaling numbers, but that's, like, more work on their side, so that it could be an option to address and try and please both parties. Whether or not they'll do it, I don't know. I mean, they still haven't put in a loot filter, which I've been begging for. But the one thing that I have an issue with, and I talked about this earlier, is a fully synergized, like, all-plus skill, bone skill necro. You have like 2,000 plus physical damage absorb. And they talked about significantly improving the scaling value that you can absorb with bone armor. So I'm worried, like, if they're like gonna like double that value, like that's pretty insane. Having like at the touch of a, especially now with quick cast, at the touch of a button, just being able to recast something that gives you like 3.5, 4K physical damage absorb. That's quite a bit. They talked about improving the skill weaken. I'm kind of curious. Thank you again, Lucky, for the raid, dude. I'm just right in the middle of a... Don't want to lose my train of thought, buddy. Let me go back to weaken. So they talked about like 1-point wonders and curses, trying to improve some of the uses. I find it interesting that they picked weaken as the curse to address. So, I mean, it gets scaling radius per investment level. It gets scaling duration. It only applies negative 33% target damage. So, I mean, if that was scaled way higher, maybe to the point of like negative 100, I would maybe consider using it. I just have a hard time seeing myself use anything other than amp damage, decrep, or lower resistance. The other curses...
My brothers will not have died in vain.
They're just that good, right? So, exactly. Like, Decrep slows down 50%, reduces their physical damage by 50%, and reduces their physical resistance by 50%. So you better add a significant amount of reduced enemy damage
hype.
to
Can't
even
wait to test them out.
to even like consider using anything other than weaken, or sorry, anything other than Decrep, right? So it's interesting that they're trying to make those improvements. Thank you, Lucky, for the 10 months, my dude. But they did not address Poison Explosion. Poison Explosion is a skill that I don't know. Just checking it out, Poison and Bone here. Poison Explosion. Level 20 is 1,300 to 1,600 damage over 9.6 seconds. So, I mean, if you compare that to a level 20 Nova, Poison Nova is 427 to 468 over 2 seconds. So, I mean, it's just a weaker...
Hey, I know this kid.
It's just a weaker Nova. Like, there's zero incentive to use it. So, I would like to see something change with Poison Explosion. They didn't mention it. This seems kind of like a useless skill. Okay, so overall, yes, I agree. That is a good point. Fist Heaven is good in PvP, but yeah, PvM, not so much. Kind of similar to the Necromancer. So overall, I think that they already touched on this, but the Paladin is already like the best character, right? Zealot, Tesladin, Hammerdin. It's a character that can easily achieve max block, but still have a huge life pool because of Holy Shield, insane amount of defense, Smite always hits, can't be interrupted. Best character for Ubers. It's already a super powerful character, but a couple of things that I really like is the changes to Fist of Heavens. Although the only thing that I wasn't super stoked on is they said they reduced the cooldown. So the piercing Holy Bolt from Fist of Heavens is cool, but when they reduce the cooldown, like I really hope it's something that you can just almost spam, because I know that again we run into that issue like we did with the Bone Necro, where you're kind of like adversely affecting PvP. But I feel like if it's a skill that you really want to spam in PvM, it has to have next to or like no cooldown. And then what aura do you run with it? Because I do know that the build is super mana intensive in Path of Diablo and Project Diablo 2, because typically they actually run like, I've seen builds where they'll actually use Redemption and an Insight Mercenary. And you're not like using like that Conviction Mercenary to max your lightning damage. I mean, again, there's a lot of different ways you can build it, but the cooldown, I really hope it's like next to no cooldown. But one of the really cool things is the better scaling for offensive auras and higher difficulty. This I really like because I just think it'd be cool for players to run a build that's similar to a Dual Dream Tesladin, but they do it with Holy Shock instead, which is cheaper because not everybody has like the wealth of the time to make Dual Dreams. So if they improve the scaling damage of that, I think there's some cool potential there. They did mention buffing up Holy Fire too. I'm interested to see people's perspectives on that. Perspectives on that, especially people that speedrun. How do they feel about Holy Fire being made stronger to, if anything, make your normal playthrough even easier? Now, with that being said, I feel like you should scale more of the game towards endgame, so I feel like most of it should be focused on hell difficulty, not normal, but that is one thing that it would significantly affect, depending on how much they increase the damage of Holy Fire. But overall, the Paladin is in a good place, but I do think that Ask Lucky. But I do think that the Fist of Heaven's cooldown, I really hope it's on the shorter end of like close to nothing. And then, yeah, the scaling auras would be really cool. Kind of like more budget Tesladin. So I think Hammerden's already in a good spot, but I like what I see. All right, so the Sorceress, I think that in general, like they mentioned on the slide, she's in a pretty good spot. They're going to shift up the cold armors a little bit. It's cool that the idea of chilling armor is going to provide the most damage and the most defense, so that as you invest more points down the tree, it makes it a somewhat more worthwhile. The only question I have with that, though, is that I get that the idea they're trying to distinguish between the different armors. What is the amount of extra enhanced defense on chilling armor going to be compared to frozen armor? Because right now, a single hard point in a frozen armor is just solid, right? It's a decent damage buff. If monsters hit you, they're actually frozen, so it gives you like a split second to keep teleporting. It's going to have to be a pretty like substantial damage buff, I think, defense buff to make me want to invest the extra points into it. And I do hope, they didn't really mention it, but they did say that it'd be the most damage. It'd be cool if maybe it received a % damage synergy from like Blizzard. So if you put 1 hard point into chilling armor, and then you work your way down the tree, you put 20 hard points into Blizzard, you're going to boost that damage of chilling armor. So that would be cool to see. So the changes to Hydra, the reduced cooldown time is cool. That's going to make the skill a little bit less annoying to play with, because that cooldown time, it's just annoying. I have messed around with fully decked out Hydra Sorceresses. They're not that good for damage. Like, they're pretty bad. They're slower. Like, they're slower killing Mephisto with a fully decked out Hydra Sorceress than it was using Fireball. So I do hope it gets a damage buff. The playstyle of it, of kind of casting and waiting for it to kill stuff while you're actively doing other attacks. I get that you don't want to make it like a meteor damage skill, but at the same time, in its current form, I think it needs more than just removing the cooldown. I think it definitely needs like a damage buff. And then lastly, talking about the synergies here between Static Field synergizing Nova. That'll be really cool for playthroughs. That'll make the Lightning Sorceress even better for working your way through normal. And then the fact that Thunderstorm and Nova synergize each other, I think that's really cool. That's like a good way of making a Nova Sorceress more viable. It'd just be cool to have a stronger Thunderstorm as you're teleporting Zerkna, spamming Nova. Because that's one thing I noticed about this build. I did play a 200 FCR Nova Sorceress. Really good in the pits, but it wasn't really good anywhere else. So I think the damage buff is really cool. Be interesting to see what's changed in Thunderstorm, but overall I think it's pretty good. I know they're going to touch on Frozen Orb later. You guys kind of like gave me that little sneak peek, but I really wish they mentioned reducing the cooldown time or completely removing it on Frozen Orb and giving it a bit of a damage buff. I just wish that Frozen Orb was more competitive with Blizzard. It's just not in any way, shape, or form, other than going through normal, other than going through Nightmare, is it a really good skill in my opinion. You have Blizzard that, with endgame gear, you can solo bail. Like if you just ignore wave 2. Let's just say we start out on wave number 3, casting Blizzard with good damage, you can completely do all the bail waves yourself. Versus try doing like a player's 8 bail wave on a Frozen Orb Sorceress. You're going to be teleporting, casting a couple orbs, teleporting, casting a couple orbs. It's just ridiculous, the disparity in damage. I know one is AoE and one is targeted damage, but it definitely needs a bit of a damage buff to be more competitive. A little bit disappointed they didn't mention it, but fingers crossed they touch on it later. So talking about Mercenaries. Now, they didn't specifically touch on something which Smoke just said in chat there. Maybe they touch on it in the Q&A. The biggest issue that I have with these updates, I think that they're going in the right direction, trying to improve the viability of the additional Mercenaries. And they did touch on this numerous times, that everything literally boils down to, in 99% of scenarios, excuse me, you're basically using an Insight Mercenary, a Reaper's Toll Mercenary, or an Infinity Mercenary, and then you're using either a Holy Freeze or a Might variant of those builds. That comprises of 99% of builds, and then the odd time you're using, like was mentioned, a Faith Act 1 Mercenary. So as far as the rogue updates go, they talked about using different ranged attacks, so I'm just going to go out on a limb here, but I'm assuming you're talking Cold Arrow and Fire Arrow. Maybe one shoots Freezing Arrow and the other one shoots Immolation Arrow. That is cool, and they talked about significantly buffing the damage. I just don't see how, regardless of what these numbers are, unless they're like astronomical pumped up damage values, I don't think that they will still be used at all. I still think you're going to be focusing on the Act 2 Mercenaries. I have toyed around in the past with some pretty crazy builds on Battle.net way back in the day. I used an Act 1 Rogue with Treachery, so she would attack super quickly, Ice in a Great Bow, so that she would have the Holy Freeze aura and proc Frost Novas, and then Delirium for a helmet. So she was attacking as quickly as she possibly could. She had Life Leech from Ice, and she would spam Frost Novas, and she would proc the Curse Confuse. I used that as a crowd control mercenary, and I think the damage wasn't even higher than like 1200 physical damage, and plus like whatever the extra little bit cold damage is. I just can't see them being very viable unless they significantly increase the rate at which they fire their ranged spells, and they somewhat change their AI a little bit, because Act 2 Mercenaries are kind of in the middle. Act 5 Mercenaries do have naturally a little bit more aggressive aggro. Act 1 Mercenaries like to hang back, which is fine, helps them with their survivability, but I'm just picturing a mercenary that even with like a really expensive rune word like Ice, it's just not going to do a ton of damage. Now, I think this could be addressed with auras. They did introduce these in Project Diablo 2. I wouldn't change the Act 1 mercenary auras that they use. I think they're great. The Vigor aura and the Meditation aura, I think, are really solid choices. I think that those two options would be really good. So Meditation aura kind of replaces Insight Mercenary. If it's spamming Freezing Arrow for some extra crowd control, you get Meditation. That would be really cool. There was no mention of additional auras, so I do hope that they consider that as feedback. And then I do like the idea that Project Diablo 2 did with Vigor. So you can run around quicker, solid like choice. Either one of those would make me want to, in certain builds, use those rogue setups. Act 2 Mercenaries, I wouldn't change anything. They did mention some quality of life stuff, how like in Nightmare and Hell difficulty, you can hire a Holy Freeze or a Might Aura mercenary, so you don't have to go back from Hell back to norm or back to Nightmare to change your mercenary. That's really cool for single player. You won't have to reset your maps, so I do like that quality of life change. They did mention some improvements to like stat updates and upgrades to the Act 3 mercenaries. Again, for them to be even remotely viable, I feel like they need a large damage upgrade, potentially changing the skills that they cast. So I don't know, they cast Blizzard instead of Glacial Spike, and then the frequency at which they attack. Now again, I have an older build video on my channel, like an older video on my channel. I messed around with what I thought was the best possible Act 3 mercenary that I could make. It was a 15 cold damage Nightwings with a 5/5 facet, a +3 to Glacial Spike, 5/5 cold facet Ormus Robes. I believe it was a 4 open socket Ethereal Monarch with 4 5/5 cold facets, or maybe 4/4 cold facets, can't remember. And then a cold faceted Crystal Sword. And then I ran around with a completely maxed out Conviction Aura teleporting Paladin to give him full lower resistance, or like lowering res support, and he couldn't kill anything. It was painful. So they need something to boost their damage, and I think they need support auras as well. I can't really think of too many like solid auras. Like, I'll just do a quick look over maybe some of the defensive and offensive auras for the Paladin. Maybe like Sanctuary would be cool. They could provide some extra crowd control, like a Sanctuary Act 3 Mercenary with cold damage would be kind of cool. Maybe a decent damage scaling Holy Shock aura for the lightning variant, and maybe a decent damage scaling, I want to say Holy Freeze, but Holy Freeze, I don't know. I can't think of a third one for a cold one, but I think that they need some sort of upgrade. In terms of aura support, Cleansing would be a cool idea. And then the final one is the Act 5 Mercenaries. I like the idea of the Battle Cry support. Now, the only thing for Battle Cry is that if you did want to have curses involved, like, I don't know if you were like a Necromancer, and then you wanted to, you know, cast your curses or whatever, I'm 99% sure that Battle Cry overrides a curse. So, or I'm 99% sure. Maybe I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong in chat. I don't think you can have the Battle Cry active with curse at the same time. So, I don't know. I just feel like you're always going to default to like a Reaper's Toll Act 2 Mercenary. But I do think that they, again, need an additional support aura. So they're buffing their damage and their life. That's really cool. I think they should get, and again, I mean, sound off if you guys think I'm completely wrong here, but Act 5 Mercenaries don't have access to the super overpowered rune words and unique items like Reaper's Toll, Infinity, or Insight. So I think they need something that would make them unique and somewhat offset the damage. I think if they had a scaling like level 5 to 10 concentration aura. Now you might think that's super fucking OP, but I don't even think a level 10 concentration aura and then not having a rune word sword is as powerful as a Might Mercenary with Reaper's Toll. So I just think there's, again, something needs to be kind of addressed with the balance. And again, maybe you could have like super expensive, super endgame variant builds like Last Wish and Concentration. And to the other rune words to buff the variants, I think to an extent they will, but because I do know what they are, but I don't think they'll help as much as what you think they were. In my opinion, they won't. So that's what I would kind of sweeping stuff I would adjust across the board to make Mercenaries more viable. Again, I really think it just struggles down to the two themes of Act 2 has the support auras and Act 2 has the best rune words. So they do want to address some of the rune words. That'll help, but I really do think they need supplemental auras to make them stronger.